Ronald Read worked as a janitor and gas station attendant his entire life. And when he died in 2014, he left behind a fortune of $8 million. Here's the thing that makes this story so extraordinary. Ronald Read never earned a high salary, never received an inheritance, and never once claimed to have a secret investment strategy. Yet, when his will was read aloud, the room fell completely silent because nobody who knew him had any idea this quiet, modest man had been building one of the most impressive personal fortunes in the history of Vermont. Meanwhile, tens of millions of Americans who earned far more than Ronald Read ever did, with college degrees, corporate salaries, and benefit packages, are heading into their retirement years with less than $100,000 saved, which according to Federal Reserve data is the reality for roughly half of all Americans approaching retirement age. Stay with me until the end of this video, because the real reason behind this gap is something that is almost never discussed honestly, and once you understand it, you will never look at your working years the same way again. In the next 13 minutes, I am going to show you exactly why the American retirement system is designed in a way that quietly works against the people who follow the most common advice. And I am going to show you the specific thing that separates people like Ronald Read from the 90% who work their entire lives and still end up financially dependent in their final years. And most importantly, what you can do about it starting today. Growing up in America, the idea of retirement planning was never something anyone sat down and explained to us. You worked, you saved whatever was left over, and you hoped your family would take care of the rest. Which is honestly how most of the world still thinks about old age. But when I started studying the American financial system closely, I came across the story of two men whose lives changed the way I understand money forever. The first man was Ronald Read, the janitor you just heard about. And the second was a Wall Street executive who earned over $200,000 a year for 3 decades, drove the right cars, lived in the right neighborhood, sent his kids to the right schools, and retired at 65 with almost nothing left after accounting for his mortgage, credit card debt, and lifestyle costs that had quietly consumed every dollar he ever earned. The difference between these two men was not intelligence, luck, or opportunity. It was one single habit that Ronald Read understood deeply and the executive never did. And that habit is the foundation of everything we are going to talk about today. Here's the first thing most people never truly understand. Earning a good income and building actual wealth are two completely separate activities that require two completely different sets of behaviors. And confusing the two is the single most expensive mistake that working Americans make across their entire careers. Think of it this way. Imagine your income is water flowing into a bucket, and every dollar you spend on housing, cars, subscriptions, dining out, and the general cost of keeping up with a certain lifestyle is a hole in that bucket. And what most people do as their income grows is not save more, but instead quietly drill more holes by upgrading their lifestyle in ways that feel completely reasonable in the moment, which means the bucket never actually fills up regardless of how fast the water flows in. The Bureau of Labor Statistics confirms that the average American household spends approximately 90% of its after-tax income every single year, which means that even someone earning $100,000 annually is only saving around $10,000 per year before accounting for unexpected expenses that drain even that small reserve. Now here is what Ronald Read understood that most people do not. He kept his lifestyle nearly fixed even as his modest income slowly grew, which meant every small raise and every small bonus went directly into investments rather than into a bigger television or a newer car, and that discipline compounded quietly over 50 years into something that shocked an entire state. The actionable step here is deceptively simple. Before you upgrade a single thing about your lifestyle, make sure your investment contribution has already grown by at least the same percentage. Because the gap between those two lines is literally the gap between retiring with wealth and retiring with worry. But here's what most people completely miss about this. The income trap is made dramatically worse by a system that is specifically designed to make spending feel like progress. Main point 2, the American consumer system and why it targets working people. Picture this. From the moment you receive your first paycheck, you are surrounded by an entire industry whose sole purpose is to convert that paycheck into consumption as quickly as possible. And this industry, which includes lenders, advertisers, retail corporations, and even the housing market, is extraordinarily good at making spending feel like achievement and debt feel like sophistication. The Federal Reserve's 2023 consumer credit data shows that the average American carries approximately $6,000 in credit card debt at any given time. And at an average annual percentage yield of roughly 22%, that single balance costs the typical cardholder over $1,300 per year in interest payments alone, which is money that is permanently removed from any possible wealth-building activity. Here is the thing most people do not realize, that $1,300 per year, if invested instead, into the S&P 500 index from age 25 to age 65, would grow to approximately $350,000, based on the historical average return of approximately 10% annually over more than 50 years. Which means credit card interest is not just an inconvenience. It is one of the most expensive decisions a working person can make across an entire lifetime. The practical application here is to treat debt elimination as an investment with a guaranteed return equal to whatever interest rate you are currently paying. Because paying off a 22% credit card balance is mathematically identical to earning 22% on an investment which no legitimate investment in the world can reliably promise you. Now, this is where it gets genuinely interesting, because even people who avoid debt and save consistently often make a third mistake that quietly destroys decades of progress. Main point 3, the idle cash trap and the cost of playing it safe. Growing up, watching family members keep their savings in a fixed deposit account, earning 3 or 4% annually, I assumed that safety was always the smart choice. But studying the American system revealed something that genuinely changed how I think about money, which is that in a country where inflation has historically averaged around 3% per year, keeping your savings in a low-yield account is not playing it safe. It is losing ground in slow motion. Imagine you put $100,000 into a standard savings account earning 1% annually, and inflation runs at 3% annually for the next 30 years. At the end of those 30 years, the number in your account looks larger because it has grown slightly, but the purchasing power of that money has actually declined by nearly 50%, meaning you would need almost $200,000 just to buy what $100,000 bought you when you started. This is the idle cash trap, and it is why Sylvia Bloom, a legal secretary in New York, who earned a modest salary for 67 years and quietly invested every spare dollar into low-cost stock market index funds, was able to leave behind an estate worth $9 million when she passed away in 2016. Because she understood that patient, consistent exposure to the American stock market is how ordinary income earners build extraordinary wealth over time. The specific action here is to open a brokerage account, either a traditional individual retirement account or a Roth individual retirement account, and begin directing your savings into a simple total market index fund, rather than letting that money sit idle. Because the difference between 3% annual growth and 10% annual growth on even a modest monthly contribution of $300 over 40 years is the difference between retiring with $160,000 and retiring with over $1.5 million. Stay with me here, because this next section is the most important, and it connects everything we have covered so far into the single root cause behind the retirement crisis. Main point 4, the 40-year time theft and why effort without ownership always loses. Here is the piece that nobody talks about. The American retirement system was designed in an era when a single employer would take care of a worker for life through a pension plan, meaning the company bore all the financial risk and the worker simply showed up and trusted the system. But that era ended decades ago, and the shift from pension plans to 401k retirement accounts quietly transferred all of the financial responsibility from corporations to individual workers without anyone adequately explaining what that responsibility actually required. According to Federal Reserve data from 2022, nearly half of American workers between the ages of 55 and 64 have less than $100,000 in retirement savings. And this is not because those workers were lazy or irresponsible. It is because nobody clearly explained to them that trading 40 years of effort for a salary is not the same as building wealth. And that the only way to actually retire with financial freedom is to make your money work just as hard as you do during those 40 years. The American financial system has tools built into it that most people, whether living in the US or back home watching from a distance, simply are not aware of. Tools like the Roth Individual Retirement Account, where your money grows completely tax-free for decades, and health savings accounts, which allow you to invest pre-tax dollars for medical costs and build a secondary retirement fund simultaneously. And employer 401k matching programs that are essentially free money that millions of eligible workers leave unclaimed every single year because they simply do not know it is available. The actionable step here is to start by contributing at minimum the full employer match percentage to your 401k, because walking away from that match is mathematically equivalent to refusing a guaranteed 100% return on the first dollar you invest. And no other investment on earth offers you that. We have covered 4 things so far: the wealth illusion that makes income feel like progress, the consumer system that quietly drains working people's savings, the idle cash trap that makes playing it safe the most expensive choice of all, and the 40-year time theft that happens when effort is never converted into ownership. And what we are about to reveal in the next 2 minutes is the one connecting thread that explains everything. Here is the real reason nobody talks about, and this is the answer to everything you heard in the opening of this video. The 90% of Americans who work 40 years and still retire broke are not failing because they worked the wrong jobs or earned the wrong salaries. They are failing because they spent 40 years exchanging their time for money without ever learning to exchange their money for assets. And that single distinction is the entire difference between Ronald Read dying with $8 million and a Wall Street executive dying with nothing. Ronald Read's secret was not genius. It was simply that he understood one rule that the American financial industry rarely teaches clearly, which is that wealth is not built by earning more. It is built by consistently keeping the gap between what you earn and what you spend, and then deploying that gap into assets that grow on their own. While you sleep, while you work, while you live your life, and ultimately, while you retire in the peace that most working Americans never get to experience. The Federal Reserve's own data shows that the wealthiest 10% of Americans own approximately 87% of all stocks and mutual funds in the country. Not because they earn 10 times more than everyone else, but because they learned to own pieces of the economy rather than simply serving it with their labor. And here is what makes this particularly meaningful for anyone watching from anywhere or as part of the American community. Everyone comes from a culture where deeply values hard work and sacrifice. But the American financial system rewards something slightly different, which is not just hard work, but patient, consistent ownership. And the most powerful thing any working person can do, regardless of their salary, is to begin treating their investment account with the same discipline and seriousness that they bring to their job every single day. The person who retires with freedom is not the person who earned the most. They are the person who understood earliest that money needs to be put to work, not just earned and spent. And that understanding is available to anyone willing to learn it, regardless of where they started, what they earn, or where they were born. If someone in your life is working hard, but has never heard the difference between income and wealth, share this video with them. Because that one conversation might be the most valuable thing they receive this year. And in the next video, I am going to walk through exactly how to build a simple 3-fund investment portfolio that any working person can set up in under 30 minutes, starting with as little as $50. That video could genuinely change the trajectory of your financial life. So make sure you do not miss it.